I feel that Boulder, Denver has a very special entrepreneurial community and ecosystem. And each of these people have experienced the culture here, but also have experienced it other places. And so they're going to talk a little bit about their experiences in those cities, and then reference it back to what they've experienced here. And I thought, I've never heard this topic before, so I thought it would be a great, because I was talking to people that were new, and they're like, oh, I came here because of Boulder, or I came here because of the culture, or it's amazing what's going on here. So I thought, well, let's have some people tell us what they've experienced in the world, and you can check it off against what you have done as well. So let me introduce also my counterpart tonight, Dave Taylor. He is going to be our moderator, so we encourage you to ask questions of our presenters. Tonight is not a PowerPoint type of presentation, it's a conversation. And the more you can ask clarifying questions and get more out of our presenters, the more value you'll get tonight. And and Dave will be here to make sure that happens, and to keep our presenters keeping the topic real and keeping it interesting. For the people that came up and were brave enough to speak in front of the audience, give them a hand, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Is that good?
Yeah. Is that good?
Yeah.
I love to see nodding heads, so just keep nodding. Whatever I say, just keep nodding. Don't keep me going. So it's great to be here, and it's exciting that these kind of things can happen from a distance, because that opens up a whole new possibility of speakers going forward. My name is Michael Potts, but I did have an exciting event today that actually a lot of people know me as Michael Ezob. Because what Brian doesn't tell you, although he invented the entrepreneurial zone of genius, he did it 5 years ago and didn't do anything with it. Because it took somebody else and a few other people to come up to him and say, come on, we need to do something with this to get it moving. And running around, I left Boulder 2.5 years ago, and in fact, on my journey, every other conversation I've seemed to have, certainly in the last year or so, has been spreading the Ezob gospel that was Boulder born, but is gradually eking itself into the entrepreneurial communities further afield, which is exciting. I came to Boulder, I was very excited because I'm an outdoors kind of guy, and I was really enjoyed the weather. And when I saw Brian's title, what makes Boulder, Denver unique, my first thing for entrepreneurship was 300 days of sunshine. I tell you, I've traveled to lots of places around the world, and the one thing I've never had in Boulder is the sunshine, and it's not just the weather. It's the smiley faces that keep smiling at me and nodding, so I know that you're listening. And that's really quite exciting when you get there, and it really makes you want to come back. I've done different journeys. 15 years ago I was working at Ford on electric vehicles. That's what got me to the States. I then did some industrial sales, and I came out to Boulder trying to work in people space, trying to find the magic sauce that gets people lubricated so that they don't argue with each other and they get excited about working together, which is interesting in entrepreneurial environments, and that's what brought me and Brian together. Since I left Boulder, I went to New Jersey. Don't go to New Jersey, that's my opinion. Definitely a step backwards. Tried hard to get into an angel community, an entrepreneurial community. Traveled a lot, 2 hours per meeting of 5 people who all were interested in themselves. They weren't interested in other people. I certainly couldn't understand how they were getting on doing what they were doing. I then moved to Switzerland, and Switzerland's a really interesting place. The language is a bit challenging, certainly the German side of Switzerland, but they all speak English, and they're very, very determined that they have this Swiss sauce that they want to import around the world, because when it's got that made in Switzerland stamp, that's perfect. And they're creative, and they make things happen, and it's very exciting. But I did get into one discussion in the entrepreneurial community there about this made in Switzerland, because there's a certain edible product in Switzerland that they're very, very proud about. Does anybody know what it is? Chocolate. Did I hear chocolate? I can't hear very well, I'm afraid.
Yeah, chocolate, they said.
Chocolate. So there's lots of cows in Switzerland, there's lots of milk in Switzerland. Guess what there isn't in Switzerland? Any cocoa plantations, yeah. So they were very aggressive about everything had to be made in Switzerland to get this stamp, and yet one of their biggest exports isn't made in Switzerland, it's just how they present themselves. And that sort of flows into some of the entrepreneurial discussions I got, that they're quite happy to borrow anything, brand it, make it special, charge twice as much for it, and that's made in Switzerland for you. I moved a little bit out of Switzerland to France, and France is having an interesting economic situation at the moment. They've got their own unemployment issues, and they had a lot of traditional industries, much as some areas in North America did, Carolinas, where mining, coal mining, potassium mining, these sort of things for what kept everybody busy, they've all gone, they've all stopped, they've all gone elsewhere. And these big territories, the Alsace region, is relying on entrepreneurship to fill that gap. But they don't have homegrown entrepreneurs, they have miners. And so they're coming up with all sorts of government-funded structures to try and create entrepreneurial schools, entrepreneurial environments. You can get a meeting room in any city for free. You can get a desk in any city for free to go and sit at and run meetings. They also came up with a new class of person. Rather than self-employed, they call them entrepreneur, where they got through all the red tape and made it super simple to set yourself up as an entrepreneur in France. Just because they were trying to eat into a legislative environment that they needed entrepreneurs to bail them out, and they see that as the way forward. And that was interesting that, you know, the government had really stepped into that space and was trying to lubricate it. And I travel a lot, by the way. So out of France, we then moved to Boston. So I'm now sitting talking to you in my apartment in Boston. And Boston has been a really interesting reflection, because when I first went to Boulder, I was looking to find the entrepreneurial community. I worked around, I looked who was running meetups, I looked what groups there were going on, and you know, I found Brian's found the meetup. I did know that the DaVinci was in Louisville, and yet it took me 2 or 3 or 4 months to actually get to a meeting. They happen typically once a month, and you meet different people. Boston's not like that. Well, certain areas of Boston isn't. I'm currently sitting in Cambridge, and round the corner is MIT, and up the road is Harvard, and there are 60 educational institutes in the Boston area, of which 30 or so have specific entrepreneur subclasses. There's probably 7 or 8 incubators going on, some of which are locally funded. I mean, the Dave Cohen Techstars came out here and they, you know, put that, but we're in Boulder, you know at Techstars, they're one of the biggest. In Boston, they're one of the latecomers, and they're certainly not the biggest in what's going on here. And I walk out every day and I can get free beer and free pizza virtually at 10 different places, 4 nights a week. And there's hundreds of people at these places going there. The interesting thing is, they are quite closed, if you like. It's not real. You know, I'm an engineer, I feel things, I touch things, I like to see things, I like to go on journeys with people. And what was very exciting to me about the time in Boulder and the things I saw there was the people I met were very real, grounded, taking their time to do it right. You know, it's a life, an integration of life and balance, and entrepreneurship is just their choice of how they do that journey. When I see what's going on, certainly in Boston here, it's the quick way to get rich, or it's the, you know, you're successful if by 22 you kind of got not just angel money, but sort of investor money, VC money, and you know, unless it's up in the millions, then you're not successful at all. And it's been a real eye-opener to be in that exposure some things happen very easily, but it's have its own feeling of entrepreneurship in one sense that's very public. You can make lots of publicity about it. It's very noisy. There's hundreds of people involved, and yet on the other side, it lacks, I wouldn't say integrity, but it lacks a harmony with life that was certainly more of what I saw and found and felt when I was closer to your community. Before coming to Boulder, I was in Connecticut. Before Connecticut, I was in Ann Arbor. Before Ann Arbor, I was in Paris. Before Paris, I was in London. Before London, I moved around Europe a few places. I've set up companies in 5 different countries and I think 4 different states in North America. And I'm fed up of listening to my own voice, so I'd like to move on to a couple of questions. You need to answer the question, really, what makes Boulder Denver unique? I'm perhaps in a position to give you an idea of what's going on a little bit elsewhere in the world or in other places. I mean, what kind of questions do you have?
All right, do people have some questions, hopefully? Okay, well, we'll come up with some questions for you, because you're actually sitting here looking at these 2 empty chairs. They're the only 2 empty chairs in the whole room. So it's just an astonishing coincidence, and I am a disembodied voice, so this is perfect. So I'll ask you, since you're involved in all these events in Boston, and you said that there's nothing there, that they're just people socializing, do you think that it's because it's a very strong student community and it's the chance for free beer and pizza, as you said? Or do you think these people are genuinely trying to invent amazing new things and change the world?
They're there and they're engaged and they're people. The depth of the people that I engage is different. That's what I'm saying. I spent last weekend at a startup weekend here in Boston, and I'd not been to one before, and it was quite an interesting experience. 40% of the people of the 150 in the room were students. The other 60% were probably 30-ish. I mean, everybody was a few years younger than me. And the range of topics, 4 of the topics were non-profit topics. So it isn't, they're not trying to do a lot of great things in a very useful way. However, when you go to the networking events, it's, who do you know and which VCs do you know and which angels do you know, more than, what are you doing and how can I help you?
Okay, so one of the things that I've found really interesting about the Boulder entrepreneurial community versus Silicon Valley, where I used to work, is there's a lot less protection of intellectual property. And when I used to go to events in Silicon Valley during the whole .com thing, people would get up and they'd talk, but no one would actually ever say anything, because God forbid you might sit in the back and say, oh, what a good idea, I'm going to go do that tonight. So one of the things that's interesting in my experience in the Boulder community is that people are pretty open. They're pretty open about what they're doing and what their challenges are and where they're going and where they're trying to go and what help they seek, what help they need. What's that like in the Boston community? What's that like overseas? Do you find that people are much more closed and protective with their IP? Or do you find that this is something that's common across entrepreneurial communities? Did you catch that?
I've certainly seen the whole gambit. I agree with you, there's an openness to a conversation that's very refreshing in Boulder. It's really what's beneath the surface. We've got this technology, it's really cool. I need something. And it's I need money, I need a developer. It's not usually, I need some ideas or some help. Who do you know that could perhaps help us or sort it out? It's much more, I need this kick-ass developer who's going to solve all my problems for free so that I can make $1 million.
Actually, now that you mentioned it, I do need a kick-ass. No.
Maybe Boston, that's your recruiting guy.
Yeah, so one of the other differences I see between, for example, Boulder and Denver is that when I go to networking events in Denver, no offense to anyone, but I find that it's mostly service providers looking for clients. And in Boulder, they don't ever seem to show up. I don't know whether I just have good luck in picking meetings, but again, in the Boston, in the world you've been there, do a lot of like insurance brokers and stuff show up?
Again, I would say I've sensed that a little bit when I was there. The startup weekend, there were 3 service providers fishing around, 150 people, and there was real engagement. When I go to some of the weekly networking events, there's 75 people, 20 of them may be service providers. The other 50, 60 are genuinely people, hey, I heard this is going on, this is where entrepreneurs get funded, I've got this great idea, who do I talk to get my money,
Got it. All right, well, thank you very much for your time. Do we have any final, oh, great. Here, I'm going to actually, if you just lean that way just a little bit, he'll actually see you. So go for it.
Hey.
Hi.
You have a very interesting background. I was wondering, in Boston, is there a bias towards either age or industry of the entrepreneur, or industry as in, I imagine there's a lot of software development.
I've yet to find what isn't software development, but I was very encouraged to find that there's actually a large, diverse group managing the non-profit space in different ways. So there was a group of doctors trying to set up an on-call service. There was actually some people trying to set up a security network for college campuses. There was people trying to do World Aid. And those were 3 out of 15, and the other 15 groups is, I'm going to build this super app and sell it for 99 cents and make $1 million. And I'm going to do this Twitter feed for voice for Twitter. We had 8-second sound bites, and it was going to be a Twitter voice thing.
Oh, there goes my whole idea.
But they didn't get it first. So, yes, the doorway in comes through technology, but it's surprising that everybody in the room was looking for a developer, a designer, and a business people, and they were pretty comfortable that they were looking really in those 3 development areas. Somebody who does the code, somebody that makes it look pretty, and somebody that actually helps us get other people so that it sells and they buy.
And what about the
What are
age?
you interested in?
What about the age bias? Is there an age bias to either young or old entrepreneurs?
I would say there isn't particularly. I'm 50, and people are still talking to me. However, most of the people in the room, I would say, are in the 27 to 35 range, that are out there looking for a job, because the people in the 35 to 45 range are running a lot of the companies, or the VCs, or doing those sort of things,
Interesting.
or working in the companies.
Right. Interesting. Thank you.
All right,
Okay.
Michael, thank you very much for your... So our next speaker is Adam, and so give it up for Adam. What about Tallahassee?
Please interrupt me as I speak. I have a lot of diverse background, even though I'm fairly young. I've been in business since I was 16. My mother passed away and left me a multi-million-dollar land holding, which just happens to be a art district. That's right, an actual district in the center of downtown Tallahassee. And Tallahassee is like Boulder. It's about twice the size, though, both in regular populace and student populace. It is the capital of Florida, so people hear Florida, they think, oh wow, cool, Florida, and all the other stigmas that go along with that. Most of them are positive. I have lived in Miami in South Florida. I have lived in Beijing, China. I have lived in Paris, France as well. Not all these places I did business or entrepreneurship specifically, but I was always involved in the local community business there. I've helped out getting a Techstar, or worked with some of the Techstars incubators, network affiliates in Tampa and Orlando. So I'm going to talk more than anything about Florida. And like I said, please interrupt me. Florida is very interesting. It's a place full of money, and a lot of this money is coming from either Europe, New York, or South America. Most of these sources of capital and wealth, they are not from venture-backed companies. This is very important. Many of these people opened up a fast food franchise and made millions of dollars. Real estate, obviously, real estate, if you had, say, the Joe Blow millionaire, if there is such a thing, what did you make your money in? He'd be a condo developer, as I'm sure you can imagine, or a realtor for multi-million dollar homes. So the wealthy people out here that you're going to talk to and pitch your ideas to and hopefully get funding from, they are not the same people you would find in other places like Florida. They do not have that propensity to risk. They are from these more kind of stagnant industries. So that alone was one of the biggest hindrances to the ecosystem out there. The last speaker talked about Startup Weekend. Well, I was the main organizer, myself and Lola, for Startup Weekend in Tallahassee, the first one in North Florida. We were working on developing a technology startup incubator in Tallahassee in my property, Road Square. And we were working on affiliation with Techstars out here in Boulder. The difference is that most of the sources of capital there, they wanted about 3 or 4 times the regular amount of equity for the investment size. So as opposed to about 6% for 20 grand is what Techstars normally funds. Now they're doing actually 120 grand. But let's go with the one they were doing before. 6% of the company for $20,000. A lot of the people in Tallahassee, they weren't used to, or Florida in general, they weren't used to not owning a large stake, sometimes even a controlling stake. And they're also not used to multiple rounds of funding. Even though they know about dilution and they know the terms Series A and Seed and Series B, they are not personally familiar, and there's no way, well, I'm not gonna say there's no way, because there's always exceptions, but there's a lot less probability that they're gonna feel comfortable only owning 10%. I would much rather own 10% of a $100 million company than 80% of nothing, or 100% of nothing, or whatever that saying typically goes. So there's also an age bias there. If it wasn't for the fact that I have the largest private land holding in that city, I would not be taken seriously because of my age. Sometimes, very interesting in other places, like the Valley, it can be the opposite, the inverse of that. If you're 30, or sorry, not 30, but if you're 40 or over and you're talking about a software application, then maybe VCs might look at you funny or might be like, okay, that's interesting. Who else is on your team? And if you don't have someone who looks and talks like Mark Zuckerberg, then it's a strike off of your fundability. Brad Feld here in Boulder has done a lot for the community. He's written a lot about what makes a startup community, and he advises other people like myself who is a leader in their startup community through his blog postings, his books, his programs, his initiatives. And he says it takes a 20-year commitment of at least a handful of entrepreneurs to really decide that community needs to be at a greater level of intellect for entrepreneurialism. And unfortunately, I just couldn't stomach it, and I decided to move out to Boulder, and as opposed to putting in my 20 years, move out to Boulder and become an operator. So I'm on my, maybe 4th venture now. I've owned a restaurant. I have done real estate development. I have consulted with different startups, helped people do startups, mostly in technology. But I have to say that you all in Boulder have an incredible opportunity to talk to anybody, because anybody will talk to you, which is not something that will happen in other places. It's a lot harder to get a meeting with a top-tier venture capitalist. Here, I'm sure you could shoot Foundry an email and some interesting things about your company, and at the very least, you'll get a response back. Pretty confident about that. Lola here, she's Canadian by descent. This is probably the most Canadian of a place I've ever been to in America. And I say that in a nice way, as in everyone's very friendly, everyone's very eco-conscientious, And as was also spoken about, it was IP protection. It's incredible when you go around the world, in many places I've been to, they're very hesitant because they think that the guy next to them is going to go off and develop their application overnight or jump on their idea. And maybe it's a little bit harder with some things like highly forming, very solid materials, what you're doing, sir. But with a thing like an application, software application, yeah, people can go replicate it fairly easily if they have the right skill sets. But there's not that hesitancy here. People know that everyone's doing something cool. They like what they're doing. There are very few people who go to something and just say, I'm an awesome developer, but I don't have any ideas whatsoever. Or I'm an awesome developer, and there's not 20 other people offering me $1 million to work for their company. So I'm saying that you have no excuses whatsoever to not go out there and find your complementary skill sets. If you're an engineer, go find someone to help you bring to market what your product is. If you're a designer or a developer or any of these things, it sounds like a lot of these people here are more on the side of the technical, right? Which is great, but you definitely need that complementary skill set. So including artists, including designers, including business people. I've given a lot of different public speeches. One of them was a TED Talk about how creativity is America's economic savior. And you can go online, and I'll post some links for people to go check it out if they're interested. But what I say in that relates to the whole aura of what Boulder and this greater metropolitan community is that there are incredible people here. And incredible people that don't look like you, or that do look like you, that talk like you, or don't talk like you, that are in an industry where they get paid a lot of money, or they're in an industry that they're just struggling. So, but regardless, you can learn a lot from them, from everybody of this creative nature. So I'm a big believer in things like the co-working concept. I think what you're doing is very interesting. I'd be happy to talk to you about Westminster's revitalization program, or about the co-working space that another gentleman's trying to create, wherever he is. There you go. A lot of these concepts, they all go hand in hand, because I guarantee you that you can go around and talk to an uber geek computer guy, and I say that in the most respect, and you can get him in the room with a hippie artist, and then throw in an MBA in a suit, and they can work together here in Boulder. They can talk to each other. They can go in there into a conversation without bias on what people look like, how people talk, and they can extract that raw knowledge, what they really want to know, what they really should know to produce something. I can go on and on about this, but I would just say that go out there and find people who don't look like you and who don't talk like you, but you can still meet eye to eye. People of skill sets that you need, but you don't really, you think, I'll get there eventually. One of my favorite sayings that I think I coined, I haven't heard it elsewhere, is that artists, and I say artists as a very broad scope because I'm sure many of you know that Steve Jobs considered his company a company of artists. So it says designed by Apple and manufactured in China. Well, I think anyone who creates something from nothing is an artist of some sort. This is the DaVinci Institute, Michelangelo as well. These guys, they were Renaissance men. They did all sorts of stuff. They weren't just inventors, they were artists. So what I think is this: everyone should be an artist, and that artists specifically are like psychologists who work on products, as opposed to psychologists themselves who work on, there's the service-based industry. So think about that for just one moment. Artists are psychologists who work on products. They can create something that can be distributed throughout the world. A message, a painting, product, it goes on and on and on what could be considered a product. And therapists or psychologists, they get paid by the hour to sit in front of you and interpret, your own human emotion. Well, the same thing as artists understand emotional responses to their products. And you guys are making some really cool stuff, but it's going to go nowhere unless if you can get that understanding of how people relate to it. And that's why you should go talk to people who don't look like you. And that's why Boulder is so awesome, is because it's one of the first places I've ever been to where there's just a very likable nature between all citizens of this place. And that would be my message, I guess. I have a lot of diverse background. Please feed me questions related to my speech or none. So how have I funded my projects creatively? Well, obviously there's all sorts of things out there nowadays. For real estate, there's some very interesting funding techniques if you're doing something that creates economic development. Also, if you're doing it in an area where there is revitalization incentives and such, you can get a lot of stuff financed by banks by having some of the equity pledged or possibly pledged from other funding sources, be it federal, the FDA, something, and local incentives, obviously. You can go on and on and on. Obviously, also a lot of the projects I've done, as far as real estate goes, you try your best to get to a certain stage, usually the site plan A approval, which is the site plan approval, and then from there, the value of the property goes up exponentially. So you can use that as equity into your deal. Right now, with real estate deals, you have to give about 25 to 30% equity in most deals in order to get them funded. Also, if it is a owner-occupied building, there's some really good SBA programs out there that, and it only has to be 51% owner-occupied. So what I've seen other people do and helped advise other people doing is if they have a company or even a co-working space, which could also be considered its own company, they have 51% of that location, and they can get 90%, sometimes even more, 90% down of the funding source with some really favorable, like 25-year terms loans. So that's something I might be interested in. But we can talk more about that.
Yeah.
Kickstarter is a great idea, crowdfunding, this guy knows a lot about that.
Yeah, I want to jump in actually. How many people know all the words and businesses and names and such that Adam's been mentioning and that Brian's mentioned? Things like Techstars and Bradfeld. So just really quickly, like SBA, Small Business Administration, Techstars is a entrepreneurial, I call it the business summer camp.
Right, it's an accelerator.
You get a very small amount of money as a startup. You come in and for 3 months it's an extremely intense, very, very time-intensive experience. There's lots of really great mentors. And really one of the great benefits of being a Techstars company is that you have access to really, really smart people that have been successful in the community. And Brad Feld is one of the founders of Techstars. Jared Polis is another one. And they also run a venture capital group called the Founder Group. So that's how these pieces all fit together. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, thank you.
It's good to set the stage. So Brian, did you have something you wanted to add?
So, Florida has a lot of major universities in terms of populace, and what is the commitment of those universities to entrepreneurship? Do they have entrepreneurship schools? And what type of entrepreneurship are they teaching?
Sure. Well, I would say that entrepreneurship in Florida is running rampant, for sure. However, a lot of these major research universities, they're having a hard time getting engagement from the professional community. I'm sure many of the tech transfer individuals at these universities would disagree, or some of the people running the entrepreneurship programs at these universities would disagree, but some of them would certainly agree. There's not as an ease towards reaching out to the professional context. So once again, accessibility. You have a 22-year-old with an app idea or even a new product, and he wants to get into a company's distribution chain. And it's really, really difficult for them to do that. Here, I'm sure, or in many other places, they would say, yeah, sure, we'll run a pilot program or whatever. We're not going to pay you for anything up front, but we'll give you an opportunity to get your product in our distribution channel. There, it's not like that. There's definitely an age bias. So unfortunately, a lot of the university students are leaving. And I've spoken on behalf of the former CFO of Florida on this specific subject as a young entrepreneur, speaking to other people in the state about why they should support entrepreneurial initiatives for young people. So that's a big problem here. They don't have that. The accessibility to, the types of programs and internships are incredible that the young people have here and other places. But something I did want to say was really interesting is that in Florida, I feel that, this is kind of funny, the goal of a meeting in Florida, hi, so-and-so, can we have a meet for lunch or something like that, or can I tell you about what I'm doing? The goal of a meeting in Florida is to have a follow-up meeting, not to actually get anything done. So here I found that differently, and also like some individuals have said, a lot of people are relocated to here.
Hi, Adam.
Hi.
My name is Thomas Fry. I'm the founder of the DaVinci Institute. I found your background to be real interesting in that you're working in real estate and other startups at the
Sure.
same time. Whereas a lot of the young people today are growing up thinking that the only way to get into business of your own is to go into the programming route or to create apps or something online.
Right.
Where I see there's lots of opportunity in all the vacant storefronts that are out there. I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit, because you've dealt with that
Sure.
in some of your background. And I think that this is an area that's wide open, and only young people aren't thinking in those terms.
Absolutely. We walked into here, and I thought this was so cool because what my property is, it's a bunch of warehouses. Used to be a lumber mill, and over the time, it wasn't really my doing. It was actually my mother's, because it's been in the family for a while. It was converted from industrial to basically artist studios and galleries. And it was slow. It was slow going over time because Tallahassee is still the South, not like South Florida, but the South, Southern. So I would say the arts are not, and patronage for the arts are not as prevalent. And yet, over time, you get artists in there, slowly but surely, you build up a destination. Here and other places where there are existing kind of creative accumulations, it's a lot easier. What you want to do is you want to create a destination, right? And this is commercial. This was commercial and was being repurposed. We in the world, at least the developed world, we are transitioning from, of course, a manufacturing economy to a knowledge-based economy. So Lola here can tell you a lot about it. There's someone named Richard Florida. He's an economist, and he talks all about what he calls the creative class theory. Anybody here should go look him up. Some very interesting concepts. But basically what he says is anything that takes you away from your creative element is a drag on you and the economy as a whole, not just you personally. So if I'm hanging out with a bunch of, no offense, but let's see, old business type individuals who do not have any awareness to, artistic creativity, maybe they just, like I said, fast food franchise or condo developer. These guys are a drag to be around. They're a drag to pitch to, they're a drag to talk about. Even if someone doesn't fund me here or like my idea, they'll give me some great feedback and they'll say, it's awesome what you're doing. That's cool. And you can feed off them. A lot of other places, the energy is a drain. And that's really important, is keeping your energy up. So being around creative people, whether they are doing programming or if they're doing, anything, if they're authors or, just simply theorizing about the future or whatever else you do, because you do some amazing things. But, and specifically, it's about creating a destination. So, in the beginning, my mother had to give away space in our art complex in order to get artists in there. We had events. So one day a month, we have 6,000 people down in our property. 6,000 people. There's like 250,000 people in Tallahassee, so you do the math. It's grown tremendously. And it's also about branding. So I'd say anything anyone does, it should always integrate with the online world because you can get your message out there so much easier. But it's really about creating that creative environment for everybody. And also there are a lot of people who are kind of like groupies to creative people. There are people who are not creative, but they want to be around creative people because, so that brings in another crowd. I can just say that, your question was about essentially procurement with city government. So procurement with city government, and how can you get a pilot program for your energy startup, if you will, energy technology. Tallahassee, it's extremely difficult to deal with the city government there. I have extensive experience doing that, and I can only hope that Boulder is not in comparison to that. I imagine it's not. Because, of course, when thinking about it, the city government is a representation of who we as a community are. So more than likely, the city government consists of more kind of, they've been around more entrepreneurialism. They've been around more liberalism, if that's, wouldn't say that. So I think they'd be much more willing to do that. The trick is that city government, they're always strapped for cash. They're always being pulled in millions of different ways. So if you can go in there as like a public-private partnership type of mindset, you find some philanthropist to really support you and to say, get some of the equity in the deal, and then go to them with that. Yeah. Because if they don't have to come up with it, and they have programs that they can do a lot of funding themselves. Things like, it's called TIF funding, which is the tax incremental funding. So they can basically loan you money on the future value of the property around of what you're going to create. Things like that. But try to go to them with 2 or 3 aces up your sleeves. Make it so they can't say no, right?
All right, so thank you. We have some other questions. What I want to do is hold the questions because we want to get to our next speaker, and then we'll come back to topics. So thank you again, Adam, and just take us a second to switch people around.
Thanks, guys.
First of all, I'm going to apologize for my voice. I'm just getting over a cold. I don't normally sound this sultry. As an introduction, I'm Allison Lawrence. I currently work with a Dutch company called Page Builds. I was born and raised in Fort Collins. I went to Omaha for my bachelor's. I went to London for my master's. I came back to Denver for 2 years, and then I went to Holland for 5. I recently came back to Colorado in October, so very, very glad to be back to the 300 days of sun a year versus 5 years of 30 days a year in Holland. And actually, I ended up having pretty severe winter depression, which I didn't really realize. I thought it was overwhelming of the different language and the different culture, until my mother sent me a book on seasonal affective disorder and was like, yeah, I think you have this. And reading the book, yeah. So actually living in Holland, I ended up getting light therapy every season because it's really not overhyped. If you're used to 300 days of sun a year, you really feel it when you don't have that. The reason I originally moved to Holland was for love. I moved there for a Dutch guy who makes you do crazy stuff. And when I first moved out there, I kind of just took the next step in my then career, which was recruitment. I had been a outside recruiter, a sales, I don't know what you call it, a non-corporate recruiter for about 5 years. And when I moved to Holland, I sought an in-house corporate recruiter position. And I was fortunate enough to find Foot Locker actually has their European headquarters in just south of Utrecht, which is half an hour from where I live. So I was very fortunate and very grateful because now I was working in an American company, but in the Dutch environment. I'd read a lot about Dutch working culture and it being, 5 o'clock I'm logging out environment. It's also a very flat corporate environment in the Netherlands. When the manager or owner says we're going to go in this direction, everyone feels that they should have a consensus first, and they want to put in their 2 cents. And on one hand, that's really great, but when you come from a very corporate American environment, the boss says left, you're going left, and that's pretty much how it works. So I was really happy to have an American environment within the Dutch culture. And it was also a good segue into fully the Dutch culture, because more than half of my colleagues were Dutch and half were international. So for me, I had some fun experiences, which I will start discussing when I get there. To start off with, I'm going to speak mostly about Holland and my work experience there, and contrast it to some very typical American and or Colorado styles, I guess you could say. To start with, I want to take a little survey. Well, we'll go back one more just for a quick second. Now, I want everyone to take a quick breath, clear your mind, and I want to see what is the first thing that comes to your mind when I say, what are Dutch people like? How many of you would say direct? Would that be a vote? Okay. What about industrious? Is that a thought somewhere? Yeah. What about cheap? Anyone? Okay. Oh, first-hand experience. Now, anyone that is from Dutch heritage or works with Dutch people, you know, of course, I mean price-sensitive when I say cheap. Now, let's do the same survey with let's clear our minds. Now, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think Americans? Would you say friendly? Would that maybe be a word? Oh, no one. Hardworking? Would that be maybe a culture? Yeah, culture piece? Pardon? Overworking? Overworking, yes, exactly, 60 hours a week minimum. What about, what was my other word? A little bit naive, perhaps? Would anyone say that? Okay, well, those are some of the key words that maybe people abroad would think of Americans. That's why I chose those words. Now, to talk a little bit about the Netherlands, thanks, Brian. The Netherlands is quite a petite country in the north west of Europe. Dutch culture is, in general, I'll just move to the next one as well, no problem. Yeah, that's no problem. To tell you a little bit about the Dutch culture, it's highly, highly population dense. It's actually the third most densely populated country in the world, after Monaco and Malta, I think. Excuse me, thank you. They have currently 16.7 million inhabitants within a country that is 16,000 square miles. Meaning on average, they have 1,000 people per square mile, which is unbelievable, but it's true. So this is a typical Dutch train station. We all know the Dutch love their bicycles. Ride your bike to train, and then you take the train to wherever you're going to work or study. And this is typical, very typical. Now, if you're going to compare that to Colorado, just to get some reference point, we have 5.1 million inhabitants within a space of 104,000 square miles. So we have the luxury of only 49 people per square mile, which means we have a little bit of space, the Great West, right? Now, this density leads us to the next slide, which is one of the first characteristics, I would say, of the Dutch population, which is a very direct communication style. You also experience very direct communication styles in cities like New York, whole East Coast. When you're constantly bombarded by other people's faces and their mannerisms and their voice, you're going to be a little bit shorter with your opinion. I had several experiences with the direct communication, which was quite amusing. Of course, when you go into a new culture, a new language, you have some faux pas along the way, which turns out to be funny stories and things like that. For direct communication, for example, this is when I was working at the Foot Locker European headquarters, and I myself am a very polite, very friendly person. Everything's always really, really pleasant, you know, very American. And I witnessed a conversation between my Dutch boss with my Dutch colleague, Marloes and Madeline. And Marloes was on my level. We're both coordinators, and then we reported to the manager of HR. So I look over from my desk, and I see this interchange, which is kind of, as I would repeat, no, 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 no. And I'm like, whoa, what's going on, you know? It's all in Dutch. So then Madeline leaves, the boss leaves, and I'm like, whoa, Marloes, are you okay? And she was like, yeah, I'm fine, what's wrong? And I'm like, well, Madeline was like yelling at you. And she was like, no, we're talking about flyers and how to distribute them in Europe. And I'm like, oh, you guys can talk like that and it's fine. Wow, okay. So it taught me to start, detaching from the emotional aspect of communication, which is sort of inherent in Americans. It also taught me to give me a bit of a thicker skin. And I also appreciate it in business because it's a little bit, you have the friendly first half of your cup of coffee, and then it's pretty much straight to business. What's our goal? Can we mutually find a point to work together? That kind of thing. So it's a little bit more cold, a little bit more direct. But sometimes, you could see that as being a bit more effective, a little bit more to the point. Through my journey of being there for 5 years, I learned to adapt to this and appreciate the direct communication. And it was a distinct moment the week before I moved back to Colorado when I realized, I've really grown by living in this culture. I was at my girlfriend's house, and I was getting ready for some last big event, and I wasn't sure which pair of shoes to wear. So, females need a lot of affirmations. So I went to my girlfriend and was like, which pair of shoes looks better with my outfit? And she was like, well, I don't like the shoes on the left at all, so I can't really give you an opinion on that. So I probably would go with the right. And I'm like, oh, okay. Walked away and realized, 4 years ago, it would have been like, oh, you don't like my shoes? But no, it's non-emotional. It's really, here's my opinion, you asked for it, I'll give it to you. So I appreciate that a lot in the Dutch culture. To the next slide. Now, another thing that I like about Holland, and this is what really got me working toward thinking about having my own company or starting for myself. This is a pretty amazing statistics. 46% of the working population in the Netherlands works for themselves. 46%, 1 in 2 people. Another 44% work in businesses of 2 to 10 employees. So that's 90% of the Dutch working population, 90% of 16 million, well, something under 16 million, works for a business of 10 people or less. So the entrepreneurial environment is so inherent, it's inspiring. So after working for almost 3 years in the corporate environment, I was sick of the CYA, cover your ass mentality. I thought, I want to go back to my roots. I want to go back to what I did for my bachelor's degree, which is English. By then I was become fully fluent in Dutch. So I started off on my own, started my own business doing website translations from Dutch to English. So really helping Dutch companies who wanted to interact with the international market. Well, not just websites, white papers, things like that. And it's because of this environment surrounding me, I knew at least 5 of my friends working for themselves. And they're like, well, why don't you work for yourself? And I'm like, wow, I would never have thought of that before. So the small environment is a very small business environment. It's inherent in the Dutch market. Another quality of the Dutch is what I like to call price sensitive. They're very, very cheap. And they love it. They love it. They literally are penny pinchers. One thing I appreciate about the culture is, though, that they are not afraid of asking for a discount. They're not afraid of asking for a price off. They're not afraid to say, there's a small damage here, or you have it for a week and it changes and you take it back. So it goes with that outspoken nature to go all as well with their cheap nature. So the guy that I moved to Holland with was visiting me once, and we went to a running store. We both got running shoes, a pair of running pants, some socks. As we were walking up to the counter, he says, do you think we get a discount for buying a lot? And I was like, well, I don't know. So he said, we're buying a lot of stuff here. Can we get a discount on what we're purchasing? She said, well, we just actually put out a coupon for 10% off your whole purchase in this coupon book. I'll give it to you. So it was inherent in his style to say, how do I get more for less? And what I also appreciate in terms of the price sensitivity and the directness, there's a saying in Dutch, which is, je hebt een ja, maar je kan altijd een nee krijgen. Which means you have a yes, but sometimes you can get a no. So when they get a no, they're not taking it personally. They're just, well, I always can get a yes, or if I ask it a different way, they're kind of finaglers. So in the end, they get what they want for a good price, and they're quite direct about it, so I appreciate that as well. Now to go contrast this with some American characteristics, which are highlights of the American culture. I originally was going to do this in 2 slides, but this little picture is just so lovely. I think it sums us up very much. We work hard and we are very nice to people. And it's really amazing, people really say that in Europe, like Americans are so nice. They're so friendly, we're so curious. Hi, how are you doing? Is everything good? Can I get you anything else? Does it taste right? That kind of stuff. Customer service is a high-level integrated thing in our culture. We are very friendly. Something that I found interesting is I've mentioned this to a few different Dutch friends. You know, when we're raised, at least in Colorado, at least I personally, my mom would constantly say to me, how do you think that makes her feel when you say that? So you're at a 3-year-old level, you're taught, oh, what I say has impact on others, so I should be sensitive to them. Dutch people aren't raised with that. They're raised with, what's your opinion? State it. So then it's just such an inherent difference, and I think that's something that's a plus and a minus for Dutch American culture, is we are very empathetic, we're very thoughtful of the others. But I also found myself often phrasing my answer with the idea of the other in mind, sometimes to the detriment of my own. Whereas what I've learned from Dutch is like, well, this is what I think. Whom? What do you think? That's what you think? Okay, well now we'll find a middle way, as opposed to trying to find the middle way in what you're saying on your own side. So I think that's a quality that's, could find a medium way from both sides. Something else I think is interesting and quite a, general topic in America, and I think we can all agree to this. We're a little bit of consumers, just a little bit. I like to say we're very debt comfortable. In the US, it's very normal that, it's not always, it's so interesting to step away from our culture for 5 years and to come back in and to realize we are a very big country. We still have a little bit of an isolation mentality, but we also are just kind of, I wouldn't say victims, but it's so inherent that, like, okay, at football games, college football games, you're going to have 3 different credit card dealers on the promenade offering you free credit cards. And not the education of what happens with credit, but here, have a credit card and just pay $3 a month, it's fine. So we have a very consumerism society, but with that said, that drives our economy. So it's an interesting comparison, because we do a lot of our own commerce within the US. Whereas in the Netherlands, you saw how tiny their country is. They have to do a lot of their commerce outside of the Netherlands. They are the biggest distributor of food in the world. So more of their food goes out than they even have to keep themselves, for example. Whereas we think it's a big deal to be traveling or trading across the US. So it's just one of those things, apples to oranges. Certain qualities are for a reason, because our country is so big here, versus their country is very small. They have to look out, whereas we feel, quite safe looking around, I guess, within ourselves. With that said, when a little bit back to where my history, I was doing a lot of website translations. I started became a preferred supplier for a Dutch company called Page Builds. They do a lot of different online marketing things. They really connect partners with their customers who are building large-scale websites or expanding internationally, and I became their preferred partner for English content. So when we worked together for like about 1.5 years, and my previous relationship had ended, and I started looking toward other opportunities or to move back to Colorado, that is a time when they decided that they were expanding and wanted to go to the US and wanted to discuss that with me. So we looked at the whole US, and we can go to the next slide. Perfect. We had to look at, okay, so there's a lot of options for where to go to in America. There's New York, there's Silicon Valley, Chicago, Denver. I personally was lobbying for Denver, I'll admit it, but it wasn't up to me to decide. And in doing so, we looked at different markets. Denver Boulder got on the map because they hadn't really heard of it too much. But once we really looked into some hard facts, we realized that, especially the Denver Boulder area, the innovation culture here is amazing. Really, per capita, the amount of inventors and developers and incubators across the country here is really a nice hub. It's a really nice nucleus. It's also very entrepreneurial friendly, which was obviously critical for a Dutch company, that you don't have to explain yourself why you are only 10 people, or that you have to have some kind of huge reputation or a 15-year background before they take you seriously. So like something like a country like Germany, they're very foundational based and very, family business and that kind of thing, whereas Colorado specifically is very friendly to entrepreneurs. The economy in Colorado is also gratefully very stable. If you compare it to the other parts of the U.S., there's really been some peaks and valleys, whereas Colorado, consistently grows, or it stays at 1 or 2%. And then also for us, what was important for page builds was Denver is centrally located. By the end of 2012, early 2013, we're looking to expand down to Panama, go down towards South America. So it made sense to go from Amsterdam to Colorado down, as opposed to Amsterdam, New York, and then Colorado down. So location was amazing. And then also we're going to be offering a lot of conferences. They have a lot of European online marketing knowledge that they want to come and share in the US, and who doesn't want to come to the Rocky Mountains for a 3-day conference? So that was also a big benefit for our decision to come to Page Builds. So that's it in a little bit of a nutshell. Obviously, we're going to have a candid question and answer now. I also welcome anyone to contact me via my email address. I'm also on Twitter, just getting active. Less than 20 tweets, I'm getting there. And then LinkedIn as well. So hopefully that's giving you a good synopsis. I'm very welcome and open to questions. I know it can be a little bit, I wouldn't say controversial, kind of exciting to hear really some other views from both sides. And I hope I didn't push any buttons. I was more observational tone, the direct style, Dutch style. But please, I'm open to questions.
Just a real quick question about the Dutch culture.
Mm-hmm.
It would seem that most of the people don't have it in their heads that they want to build a giant corporation, which seems to be part of the American dream, is to build a giant corporation to stomp all over the other giant corporations or something. But there's a lot of people that are thinking about lifestyle businesses that they purposely want to keep them small. So is that part of the Dutch culture, is that they don't want to get anything too big?
I think it's two parts. Excuse me. The Netherlands has a very, very healthy work-life balance. And actually, the Netherlands has the highest amount of part-time workers. They're very friendly. Standard hours are 36 hours in the Netherlands. So work-life balance is very important, and I think that's a mindful idea. You don't want to grow too fast, so they do try to keep it contained to a certain level so they can maintain their lifestyle. I also think, in looking at the numbers, this increased to 46% single, we call it ZZ payer, self-standing without personnel is the translation. That is only really in the last 5 to 7 years that it's skyrocketed to 46%. One of the reasons is that as the economy slows and the economy itself is moving toward a knowledge-based economy, which we mentioned before. This is typical in the U.S. as well. Because the Netherlands has a very strict employment policy. You're very protected as an employee. It's very hard to let people go. You pay a lot of money for them. What businesses are now doing are turning more toward freelancers to fill in that knowledge gap. So the 3 fastest growing freelance sections is online marketing, project management, and I'm forgetting the second one. But they're the outside coming in type position. So that's one of the reasons as well, that they can stay small, people work for themselves, maintain their own lifestyle, and they have a very high demand because they're not costing the companies as much as an employee, so they're able to charge a little bit more personally.
It sounds to me like one of the causes of this extraordinarily high percentage of Dutch people being either self-employed or in micro companies is the employment law and the extreme protective nature of employees in an employee-employer relationship. Just projecting, if that law changed and eased, do you think there would be a lot more people that would be part of larger companies?
That's a good question. I know that there has been talk of readdressing the employment rules for the flexibility of the companies. For example, in the Netherlands, and I'm already seeing trends, especially back even when I was in HR when the whole 2008 thing happened. In the Netherlands, you have three defined contracts and then indefinite. once you're on an indefinite contract, it is very difficult to release an employee. And you have to, after 3 years of working by law, you are on an indefinite contract as a maximum. So when the recession or the dip happened, they made it so that you could extend and have 4 specific contracts before having to give an indefinite. So there is a small trend happening, and I think that, yeah, probably with most places, once it's a bit more flexible to hire and release employees, it'll probably encourage companies to let them hire employees more often, yeah.
Right, because the reason I ask that is because it actually, and don't take offense at this, I'm being Dutch direct.
Okay.
It doesn't sound like an entrepreneurial community at all. It sounds like a community that has spun off lots and lots of contract workers because the employment laws are too difficult to negotiate. So is it in fact entrepreneurial as those percentages would suggest, or is it just a fragmented, weird sort of economic result of these laws?
Well, I think that probably is a little bit half and half. People also, within certain companies, and you see how many small companies there are, you could be there 20 years and still be the director because it's a small company, it's going to stay that small company, that's the environment that they've chose to build. So people are either ambitious enough to want to leave and start on their own, see how it goes, or yeah, they're comfortable just working for themselves and doing that 20 hours a week, and that's just enough. Whether it's purely entrepreneurial, I'm going to start this company, and within 10 years it's going to be, or 5 years, it's going to be 5 million euros. That's,
yeah, I won't have any employees.
Yeah. So exactly. The culture there is very different from this, I have this brilliant idea and in 2 years I'm going to be a billionaire. That doesn't exist in Holland. Because you don't have examples like that so much.
So I'm actually interested in if you have any information on the educational component. In the US, you are very much drilled to choose your career before you even get into college, and then follow that career path as well as you can. Usually end up changing your mind at the last minute for a 5th year, senior year. And then you go and you work at a, quote, soul-sucking job. And that's kind of the expectation.
Yeah.
Now, it sounds like what you were implying was that in the Dutch culture, it's different in that you have a lot of people who are running their own business. So they're very much already geared to think, what would I do? What's my business? Can you speak a little bit to, what the youth culture is like? Do people go through college and their goal is just to amass skills to be able to do their own business? Or are they actually thinking of going to work for someone else? How does that contrast?
Well, the Dutch educational system is completely different than American. Dutch education as a basis goes through 16. Actually, even a little bit younger. I think by 12, you have to decide. There's 3 directions of Dutch education. There's the craftsmen, so the more general laborers. Then there's, I guess you'd call it, they'd call it college. So that's more like associate's level degrees. So you're done when you're about 20. And then there's university. So university is completely theoretical. Then the college is more like practical, more the operational manager, that kind of thing. And then there's the laborer. So by 12 to 14, you're already having to decide which of the 3 channels you're going to go into, also based on your education, your scores, whether you're going to qualify to go into university. So you have people who finish their education as like accounts receivable person at 16. 16 and 18, and you're already literally in the workforce. That's crazy for us, right? And then what you can do, or you can do the 16-year-old thing, and then you do the college, and then from there go into university. So it's a longer thing. So you have they're much more practical oriented. You kind of know, similar to the US, you kind of have to know what you're doing. One benefit to the Dutch culture, Dutch setup, is that higher education is highly subsidized in the Netherlands. So I had a friend who did a 5-year engineering degree and came out and his debt was maybe $8,000. So they come out with a different burden, which allows them a little bit more freedom to maybe start that business for themselves at the beginning. Or I do see a lot of people that maybe work for 2 years, get some experience, figure out how it works, and then can use that to start their own business. I knew quite a few people that around 22, 24, were starting out a little bit on their own. It is also a bit impressive to see people come straight out of university and become a consultant on their own. It's, yeah, you got to learn a little bit how to work, I think. I don't think education teaches you that, but it's a totally different situation. But yeah, I think people know a little bit more what they're wanting to do when they go into it, or they're forced to choose. I don't know if that means they actually know, but yes.
I read a study recently that in the U.S. that parents, although the majority of them have a favorable view of entrepreneurs, they don't want their kids to be entrepreneurs. What's the difference between that and the Netherlands?
That's a good one. Well, I have to kind of think back on the examples of people I have around me. I think that it's a lot more, accepted that you're a bit more independent. Dutch culture, they're very independent anyway. I think from what I've seen and what I've experienced, it's quite proud. They're quite proud of their kids to be on their own or independent or working for themselves. Some parents, depending on the area, if you went to tax education, it's a big deal if you're working with Deloitte versus having your own accounting office. Whereas for the tech people, the online marketers, it's much more, oh, he's working on his own, even if maybe the parents don't quite understand what they're doing. It's much more of an accepted and socially esteemed direction to go into. Yeah.
I have a quick question. There is a trend that I've noticed. I'm actually in the Parker area, but I have clients that go from Colorado Springs to Greeley and then up to like Louisville. But there's a trend that there's a lot of trade that happens, especially when you're first starting out. And with the Dutch being that they're price conscious, did you see that out there as well?
Well, I see some of it, yes. So, for example, a printer might give a discount to a website developer on his print, so then they would trade those. That's quite common at a small level. I'd have to say that another benefit of the reasons that I really wanted to get back to Colorado is I really missed the holistic lifestyle here. It's not so in your face in Holland, they're much more naturally organic and healthy and ride their bikes and eat balanced meals. But here, people are very mindful of their path. They do yoga, they do meditation, they do massage. And of my friends here that are in that sector, I see a lot more trades than I would have I ever saw in the Netherlands. And maybe just because that culture is different, but it seems like the trades are much more common here, which is surprising. You'd think it'd be quite friendly in the Netherlands, but it's more, commerce trade, I guess. Yeah. So the question is innovative type entrepreneurial versus just working for yourself in a standard way. Well, in my experience, keep in mind I was just in that space for about 2 years, it really seemed like it was more working for yourself in an established sector. There is a lot of innovation in the Netherlands. I'm not trying to minimize that at all, especially in online marketing, in online technology. Because it's such a condensed space, they are so competitive with each other. You can just think of all the boomers put into one country, like that mentality, So there's a lot of innovation in the tech sector, but for a lot of the people that work for themselves, they probably are accountants or managers, things like that. Maybe managers isn't a good example, but since I've been here, and it's only been about 5 months now, I do see a lot more, especially in the Boulder, Denver area, these new ideas or, apps off of something that's sort of as current, but then in a new direction. I didn't see that as much in the Netherlands, but I have to say, take this with a grain of salt, because now that I've been back for 5 months, I am in the tech sector, I am in an innovation sector, and my job is to get our word out, and I'm talking to a lot more people. Whereas before I was doing website translations and content delivery, which is kind of a solo deal. So I can't speak, 100% to that trend in the Netherlands. But compared to my experiences here, it really seems like people are developing in different ways more stuff. Whereas in the Netherlands, it seemed more toward marketing and technology. Yeah.
Great. So we have a second bullet point here, right?
Okay.
So the second bullet point is the desire to create something new, which I think also is not just a mark of entrepreneurship, but particularly something that I think a lot of people in the Boulder community have, or Boulder, Denver community. So those are two, right? So Adam, we had what? Accessibility, we have desire to create something new. Do we have a third one to wrap this up with? Anyone? Brian, come on. Brian, what's our third bullet point?
In terms of the Boulder community, I would say the willingness to collaborate.
Yeah.
We are a very collaborative group. People share, people connect each other. They form businesses together. A lot of co-founders here. It's a requirement to get into Techstars, so I think there's a lot of collaboration.
Great, so that's our third bullet point is collaborativeness.
Yeah, and that ties in, yeah.
Collaboration.
And I think we've run out of time, yes? So thank you all very much for joining us, and especially to Allison and Adam and Brian and Michael, though he's not here. Thank you all very much for being part of this. That's it, thank you.
Thank you.